you don't really know what to expect. And then all of a sudden you're listening to the thing and it's like, pow. It's like,
For me, this connects to the name of the podcast. Like when I think about growth, change, anything like that, you have no idea what's going to happen ever. And
mhm,
that's conversation. That's like when you open yourself up to, this is another human being that has the ability to influence me or change my perspective. Who who knows what that's going to bring about? So I just that's the whole idea. So all right, Tiffany, are you ready
I'm ready.
to podcast? When I met you, you were still a student at Eastern Nazarene College, my alma mater. And this was probably 2000. I want to say it was like 2017, 17, 18, maybe
I think it was 2018 because
18.
I graduated in 2019.
That makes sense. So we met when was I speaking at like a class chapel?
Yeah, so you
Okay.
were speaking at, I think it was senior class chapel,
Yeah, right.
and me and Rose were leading worship.
Right, right. Yes. Okay. And I don't remember what I said, but I know I was probably trying to agitate some people because that's what I enjoyed doing at the time.
It's funny because I don't either. I just
Yeah.
remember everybody being like, Pastor Dave Capozzi is coming, and you should be ready for it. It's
Oh,
gonna be
be
great.
ready. Watch out.
Like, you had so many like high reviews among the students who were gonna be there. They were
Wow.
like, "You're not ready for what's about to happen." And so it was just like, I just remember being like, "Wow, this was really done really well."
See, this is the problem. Anytime people got to know this. Anytime I don't see a lot of movies, but my brother James sees a ton of movies and he'll be like, it is the greatest movie. And then inevitably I go and I'm like, it was good
It was all right.
because you set someone up to be like the greatest ever and they're fine. They're fine. And that might have connected with that person or that person, but might not as much with you. And
Yep.
that's the kind of thing where we get into the habit of like gushing what we love and assuming everyone else is going to love the same thing, you know?
Mhm.
Doesn't always
I
happen. It
feel like
worked for us. It worked for us because we both heard good things about each other.
Aw. I feel like that's kind of what happened with Coming to America too. Like, no offense, but I felt like everybody gassed this movie up, just gassed it, gassed it, gassed it, gassed it. Then
Yeah.
finally I watched it and I was just like, it was a good movie, but I didn't understand.
Everything in its time, right? Though, because like you generationally, it's a very different thing. When I grew up, it was the 80s and 90s. Eddie Murphy doing that thing is like, whoa, this is such a different movie,
Yeah.
you know? And so now it's like, we've seen it. It's not as important as like monumental as it was back then. So
Exactly.
but that's the thing. You pump it up for someone, they're like, okay, yeah, it was funny, sure.
Yep. Yep.
I-
I was just like, okay.
so, all right. So when we met each other, you were leading music, which is something that I saw you do multiple times because I went back to ENC. I mean, one of the things that I was quick to see about you is everybody was drawn to you. Everybody. Like you just have this thing and you got that smile and you're just like you exude like this spirit of love and energy that I think is really uh it helps people to connect
Mhm.
with you and I think that that was instantly visible. I know from conversations with you, you love people, you're a people person, like you love to draw people in and bring them into a space of connection with yourself, with God, all of that. And then at the same time, you're a prophet. You're a social justice warrior and you established at ENC the Black Student Union, correct?
Yeah. So, which was its own whole thing.
Mm,
So, my senior year, I started the Black Student Union on campus, and what a ride it was. Like, I
mm,
don't regret it at all, actually, because it was actually the start of everything within me
yeah.
of saying, "Hey, world, this is actually where I'm going next." And that's
Mm,
actually how me and you actually connected even further because through the BSU and working with Dr. Vicky Scout, I was able to do an internship that allowed me to be able to communicate with other community organizers because
Yes.
I recently had learned, like, I was like, oh, I think I want to do that. I think I want to be a community organizer. So then I was like, I want to figure out how you do that.
Yeah.
And I was like looking at people like you, Will Dickerson, etc. And I was like, how do I do this?
Yeah.
And I met y'all.
Yes, that's right. Will was a big part of this as well. And you connected more with them later on.
Yeah.
But that was a time in 2019 when George Floyd was murdered. And no, 2020, sorry, George Floyd was murdered. So this is before that. And then George Floyd is murdered. And then all of a sudden, everyone is like on the train, right? And some way or another, everyone's like, yeah, we're gonna defeat racism and all this. It probably took what, like a month or two before people went back and were like, hold on a second. I was down with like this was not okay. This is not just police should stop doing this, but I think you're going too far, right? Like,
Yep.
did you get a lot of that pushback on campus?
Cool. So at that point, in 2020, I had already graduated from ENC, but I was living on campus,
Okay.
and I just kind of felt like, and I'm just gonna be honest, I just kind of felt like there was just some white saviorism things that started to like arise.
Mm,
I remember on campus, all the alumni were calling into ENC being like, hey, we're angry. Hey, this is what was happening. And their response was to make a scholarship in response for George Floyd. And it was like things like that, like things that you just don't do. Their response was to put me in an alumni magazine saying A's for atoms and activism. It's
mm,
like, but then when they start, their response was to start a task force, but then wouldn't put the A for atoms and activism on the task force.
yeah.
Just like weird stuff like that, they would
Yeah.
start to do. But
Yes.
while they were doing that, the rest of us, we were in the streets in Quincy starting to organize and get our names out there. So
Right.
we started two organizations, one called Quincy for Justice, and then we started organizing with Quincy for Transformative Change
Mm,
because me, Dr. Vicky Scout, and Pastor slash Reverend Matt Thomas, we understood that George Floyd wasn't just this one-off person. Breonna Taylor wasn't just this one-off person. Ahmaud Arbery wasn't just this one-off person. In fact, we knew about the Trayvon Martins. In
right.
fact, we knew about the Atiana Jeffersons. In fact, we knew about the Tamir Rices that were out there, and we knew that we need to do something. And
Yes.
so you could easily see this split actually between how far the college was willing to go compared to how far people who actually understood what was going on went.
Yeah.
And we just was like, you know what? We have to go because it's the same God that the college follows is the same God that we follow. And that God is calling us out to the streets, telling us that we need to do more. And it's biblical. Isaiah 117 says what? Speak up for those who are oppressed. Like the Bible says it over and over and over again. And so, yeah, don't get me on
Well,
a rant.
well, you might get me on a rant because you said something that I might have some. I love all of that in the sense that what you're talking about is something that's just true for people who experience the suffering in this context. And the
Mhm.
God that you worship, you said the God that we worship, same God that ENC. The people are not going to be happy with me when I say this, but I don't know if that's true.
Mm,
And the reason I don't know if that's true is because um, the God that guides and leads institutions, especially institutions that
mm,
have been founded in whiteness,
mm,
are not centered around justice. They're not centered around compassion and mercy. They're centered around business and preservation and wealth and
mm.
sustaining that. And when it comes to justice, they're willing to forego that for the sake of business preservation. And so I mean, I can say it because I'm no longer a pastor, I'm no longer a part of an institution, but that's my experience is that any institution that prefers its own preservation over justice for people who are suffering might not be exactly Jesus centered. That's I can say that you can just you can do what you need to do with that. But I will say that the work that I've seen you do, that you've been a part of, has been all about like coming from your own experience as someone who isn't just like has head knowledge of it. You've experienced racism in this world. What has it meant for you as someone who went from like this, you know, and is still this bubbly, everyone loves person, like to now I'm speaking out on behalf of myself and those who suffer? What's it been like for you to experience that shift maybe in how people relate to you?
I think it's complicated,
Yeah.
and the experience is complicated because I often tell people that like it's a performance most days.
Mm.
Like when you're in white spaces, you have to perform because when you don't, especially as a black woman, because that's what I am. So when you don't perform in those spaces, you just come off as the angry black woman, the one that nobody wants to talk about because she must have an attitude. Just because I didn't speak to you because I was in my own head trying to
Mm.
make sure that I had my ducks in a row. It's
Mm.
like you have no clue what I walked in here with, but because I'm not bubbly and because I'm just a little, I may be a little standoffish because it's something that happened when I was back home, but you don't see that and you don't have that knowledge. You just assume because of your own biases that I'm angry. And actually, if you just walk up to me and say hi, you'll notice I'm actually not really angry.
Exactly. Exactly right.
so, so it's kind of really funny. And I feel like because of the work that I do, like I get a lot of like subtle racism,
Mm.
microaggressions type things. Like why are you touching my hair? Don't walk up to me and touch my hair. It's not nice. Like
Ugh.
I don't walk up to other people to touch their hair. Just don't do certain things, right? And it's like, let's just
Right.
not play this game.
Yeah.
And I do a lot of like anti-racist trainings as well.
Yeah.
And so I think that like even from that lens, um, it's hard. It's complicated because you don't want to, because you're dealing with white fragility too, right?
Right.
You're dealing
Right.
with white fragility, white supremacy, white saviorism, all these things in one room. And so then you're like trying to teach them about how to recognize whiteness. And so
Mm.
so it's like a whole
Oh
thing.
my god.
And so sometimes like you can just get punch after punch after punch, but it takes a real, like not a real, some of us are called to educate white people,
Mm.
and some of us are not. And
Mm.
I commend the people who chooses not to and understand that it's not their calling.
Yeah.
I am one of the people that are called to teach white people, and it's blow after blow after blow. And
Yeah.
you eat it and you take that in, but you still educate. You
Right.
still want because the reality is like we didn't get to where we are by ourselves. We
No.
know the system ain't perfect, and the system works the way it's supposed to, and
Right.
we'll get to that.
Right.
However, I do think that like it was other white abolitionists who helped us along the way.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's important for us to go to other races, to go to other ethnicities and get them on board, because
Mm.
I believe that's how true equity will happen as you listen to those at the bottom of the structures of power. So we're talking about the people, indigenous people, and we're talking about Black people, and then all the intersectional lenses from there, because you got
Yes.
to talk about sexual orientation, you got to talk about gender identity, you got to talk about ableism, and so much more and so much more. Like
Mm.
it's a never ending thing, but like whoever is marginalized from each one of those intersections, you need to listen to them, especially if they're indigenous or Black.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I have for the, you know, since I first started this process of understanding whiteness and how it shows up in me, the amount of times that I've had to be corrected by someone that may have come across as angry, maybe they were angry for good reason, that I was projecting my whiteness onto them when and trying to prove to them that I'm a safe white guy, when I'm just, by doing that, I'm proving to them that I'm not. You know, those times when I experienced that were so healthy for me because
Mhm.
I needed this constant reminder of, you're not as good as you think you are. Like you still have this in you that you need to be exhumed, to be like exercise those demons. And I want to like really quick talk about that notion of an angry black woman, that whether or like if you do come across as angry as a black woman, you might be angry and that's okay, because like this system is so unjust that
Mhm.
anger is an appropriate response to it. The problem is that there's become this, like, who's calling you an angry black woman? It's white people.
Mhm.
Right. So it's not it's not a it's just affirmation that the system is completely screwed because the people that can't handle that it is not working for everybody, that everyone doesn't have the same experience, are like, "Oh, don't be so angry. What's your problem?" Well, I mean, because they're not listening, like you said, to the people who are marginalized and are
Exactly.
impacted.
And it's more than just listening, you're not experiencing it. The
Mm-hmm.
reality of the situation is like you could not walk a mile in my shoes.
No.
There's a lady named Jane. I think her name is Jane. She's a white woman.
Yes.
Everyone knows about this lady, right?
Yeah, right.
I'm gonna just
The
break down what
eyes.
she does.
The eyes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And she did this event one day and she told all the people in the people white people in the I'm gonna say the congregation, the audience. She was like, if you would like to be treated like black people are treated, stand up.
Oh.
No one is standing. And that's because you know what is happening. You know it is wrong. So why would you want it to happen to other people? When I
Mm.
seen that, I was like, whoa. It's not even that you're not listening. You do not want to walk a mile in my shoes.
Right.
You do not want to do that. You understand what is happening, but you're making a conscious decision sometimes, all the time, for you to continue with your privilege and
Yeah.
continue the benefits that you get from a system that ultimately, if it wasn't oppressing me, wasn't oppressing Latinx people, wasn't oppressing Asian people, wasn't oppressing indigenous people, who do you think it would be oppressing?
Right. Right. Exactly. That, and that's the I teach a civics class in high school, and this one kid we talked about Muhammad Ali today, and
Mm,
this one kid was like, "Oh, he was such a racist." I'm like, "Wow, give me an example of how Muhammad Ali was racist." Well, he hated white people. I'm like, did he hate white people or did he hate the system that oppressed his people? Because these are two very different things. And this like constant accusation towards those who suffer and are marginalized is the key difference that you're pointing out. It's just that when the people who desire the preservation of their privilege, like we talked about with the institution,
mhm,
over will be the willingness to like do justice, how can you be in relationship with those things? And I guess I wonder that that's a question I have for you.
mm.
How do you remain in relationship when those kinds of conversations, experiences come up? What does that look like for you?
Hmm, that's a really good question. I think that it just looks like a push through, if that
Mm,
makes sense. Because I think that my reality is if we don't have these conversations, if we're not pushing, then we'll end back up in slavery times.
mm,
The reality is if my ancestors were not moving the needle wouldn't have gotten to be moved.
true.
And part of these conversations had to happen with other race and ethnicities. And so I think that like what it looks like is yes, sometimes it's harmful, right? I do not always have the best conversations with white people. I also don't always have the best conversations with black people.
Yeah.
Like I'm not sitting here saying that one race is above another.
Yes. Right.
However, what I do want to explain is like because I think that what also ties into this, like something that popped in my head is this notion of like, oh, well, I'm not racist because I recognize my privilege and so I'm just not racist. And the reality of the situation is like not being racist is not helpful to me.
Mm,
And that's a conversation that I have with white people all the time. Is like not being racist does not save my black life. You
mm,
being anti-racist. So what that means is like going the extra mile to dismantle structures that are oppressive to black and indigenous people is the goal. You just not being racist don't do nothing to my body. It does
right.
not help me. It still makes me drown if we were in water. But you going to donate to anti-racist causes, you dismantling structures and voting people into the government that need to be there that are going to protect my black body, that's what actually matters. It's not
Mm,
enough to just not be racist. Like we got to do that a long time ago. We're not there no more. And I feel like that's one of the most harmful conversations and hardest conversations to get people to understand is like it's not enough for you not to be racist. And the other one is like the white fragility and the defensiveness that comes when you even bring up because racist has such a negative connotation as and so does white supremacists, right? Has white supremacists supremacy have such a negative connotation. And I think you were the first person to ever say, I don't want to quote you wrong, but that all white people are white supremacists. And then you broke that down in such a way when you were doing the workshop at Second Church a few years back that
Mm,
really had my mind like going in circles, because the reality is like it's true. Just like we're all born into sin, that's the reality of the situation. Like white people are inherently born into white supremacy. They're all white supremacists. You're all racist until you do something different. And I think that the piece that people have a hard time swallowing is that they need to do something different. And so they
yeah.
get so fragile, and then I got to deal with their defensiveness. And it's like, hey, I also want you to know that defensiveness is a characteristic of white supremacy.
Hey
Just
now. Hey now. See, this is what's interesting. I feel like, especially having grown up in the Christian world and constantly hearing over and over and over again, we're all sinners. We
Mhm,
all have sin, right? Why is it then when we point out one of the sins that we carry before we have a choice, which is something they also love to say, if you're white, you grow up in a system where you get this, you inherit this. You
mhm.
and if when you realize, oh, I don't want that, I don't want to oppress someone else, I don't want to hurt someone else. What do I need to do? If that's not your response, I don't know what to tell you. But like I feel like that workshop, man, that brings up. I remember feeling like, oh man, that didn't go well. But it's because I was talking to mostly white folks who didn't like to hear that we live in a white supremacist society
Mhm.
because it's uncomfortable to benefit from injustice. Nobody
Yep.
wants to benefit from injustice when they're confronted that way. And so when you're in this position constantly, Tiffany, of like embodying what people are being told is wrong with them, like you're embodying it, you're talking about it, you're out there dismantling these systems that are working, like you said, perfectly well.
Mhm.
That's a challenge to white fragility. It's a challenge to the people who are like, well, hold on, not all cops, not all white people, not all judges, right? And the truth is, it's not people. We know people are compassionate, people are loving, people are kind, we know that, all people of all races. It's not that we're saying, or you're saying, that white people are these evil people that are not capable of compassion and justice. It's just that the system has made it such that they benefit in a way from it that you don't. They it is designed to benefit people like me and not people like you.
Exactly. And I'll say this again. Some of the main abolitionists that help people like Harriet Tubman, etc., were white, right? So no one's sitting here saying that white people are evil and like, well, I'm not saying that. That's not what I am.
Some
I don't
people might. Some people might.
we aren't saying that. What we are
Yeah.
saying is it's not enough just to not be racist, right?
Yes.
Get out of the moment of having racist be such a negative connotation. Get out of that for a second and just listen to what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it's not enough for you to just be not racist, because when you're just not racist, I'm still dying in the streets. Like, I need you to protect me. I need you to get up and do something, because when you do something, maybe my life doesn't have to be killed today.
I'm gonna let
Yeah.
that sit for a second. Yeah. So when you, well, let's talk about you a little on a more personal level, if you don't mind. Because what we reconnected recently, which was so lovely, and you shared with me some things about um, your own struggles and how you're starting to see racism pop up in other systems, right? You know it infects the whole society, but you've now experienced it in other ways. And as a result of that, you now have this book that you're out there.
Yeah.
I'm excited about. So, do you mind talking a little bit about that? I know it's like your healthcare, and how that's been impacted, and how you've noticed how that's shown up. The racism has shown up in the medical system and all that sort of
Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's do this.
stuff.
So, um, so we talk about racism in a lot of different forms. Most of the time, we talk about it like as systematic racism, or we talk about overt racism, subtle racism. We talk about this in the education like as the achievement gap or the opportunity gap, all these other things. But one of the, if we talk about this in environment, right, environmental racism, well, one of the ones that I feel like we don't talk about enough is medical racism, and it's the
Mm,
ways in which Black people are being like discriminated against in the medical field, right? And it happens to Black men and women, but I'm just going to talk about Black women for a second because I am a Black woman, a
yeah.
woman. But the way in which, like, when Black women go to these doctors and we say, "Hey, I'm in excruciating pain," and no one really cares, or they
Mm,
ignore you because for some reason Black women should be able to take more pain than the average person. Confused. And when you go to the doctor and you say, "Hey, something's wrong," and they just put you on referral and they're supposed to call you back and you don't get a call back for like 6 months.
mm,
Some of these things are literally what happened to me in 2021. I realized that I had some dysfunctional uterus bleeding for almost what, a year. For the first 3 months it was happening, I went to the doctor, got an ultrasound, and they said you need to go see OBGYN ASAP. I'm calling up there, couldn't get an OBGYN people to answer the phone, calling. Finally, like a month goes by, they answer the phone and they're like, "Hey, we see your referral. We'll call you back in a day." Don't hear anything.
mm,
That was in March. Now we jump to July. I finally get here from the OBGYN department at my doctor's office, and they are like, "Hey, there was something abnormal in your ultrasound." Mind you, this is months later. And they're
mm,
like, "Hey, we need you to get a minor surgery done in December." So December 14th, I get this minor surgery done. They say, "Hey, we see endometrial polyps in your uterus lining. We want to go in and take them out." And I'm like, "Okay, cool. Like, what could be wrong with that?" I don't really know too much about the medical system up until this point.
yeah.
I would think that regardless of what doctor I have, they would educate because I didn't go to school for it. However, right after that minor surgery, what I realized is I was in more excruciating pain than I was in before the surgery, and I was bleeding much more than I was before the surgery. And I was calling up to the doctor's office every single day. No one was listening to me. They
Mm,
all were like, "Oh, are you filling up a pad?" Or this or that. And I'm like, "Hey, I am bleeding out. You need to do something.
yeah.
Something is wrong." It took them a couple of weeks before they actually acknowledged that something could have been wrong. And I went up there and I'm like, "Hey, you guys need to prescribe something. You need to do something because something is wrong." Well, I was right because
I bet.
the day after Christmas, I get a phone call from my OBGYN and she proceeds to tell me that I have endometrial cancer. And my whole world shook. My whole world
Mm,
shook.
yeah.
And of course, they were like, "Oh, this cancer is one that you won't die from, but you may not be able to have kids."
Mm,
And we weren't ready. We didn't expect any of this to happen. So there was no way to prepare you. But the reality was there was a way for someone to prepare me for a diagnosis that literally shook my life.
to the possibility that that could be.
Exactly. Or
Yeah.
to the acknowledging of the fact that, "Hey, we're gonna take your endometrial polyps in your biopsy and send it off to the lab."
Yeah.
Like, not even that communication was done. And
Wow.
some people can say, "Hey, well, you should have guessed that they were gonna do that." But also, let's think about all of the systems that are put in place, even around education around these things.
Right.
Or the fact that, like, I don't have like, my mother is alive, but she's not really in my life. I don't have
Mm,
a father. So, with that being said, when we really start talking about the system and how the system plays, how all of these things are intersective, right? They all
yes.
intersect. When you come from a lens of that and you understand what I just went through, you'll understand, like, "Hey, there was definitely some information and things like that missing from this
Absolutely.
situation."
Absolutely. Because that's something that's not considered. I appreciate you pointing it out that way. That people that have two-parent homes, that grow up in more affluent areas, that have access to more education, they're just around people who are going to medical school. A lot of people, a lot of white folks live within this world of just higher knowledge of the system, the way that it functions at each place, the medical system, the financial system, the judicial system, it is just something that someone like myself would have more knowledge of. And you're just fighting for your life. And in the midst of that fight, you're finding out about those things.
Exactly. And finding out like that you should actually keep like things that you should think about, your iron levels,
Right.
your what is it? Your hemoglobin numbers and how they can go up and down. And if they're too low, you could be severely anemic. Because
Mm,
in January, that's where I found myself at, and I almost died. And these are things that, like, hey, when I was screaming in December, I'm losing too much blood.
mm.
But maybe if we would have just did something then, how much of my life could have been different.
Yes. Right.
And so there's so much more to my story. However, I'm gonna shift us a little bit to this book. So
Yes.
throughout the year, it's been crazy. It's been a crazy year, a
Mm,
year full of doctor's appointments, a year full of more diagnoses. It's just been a lot.
mm,
But throughout all of that, I found myself having to start to look at who I am, look at where I've been and where I was going.
mm,
And I had to realize that, hey, this cancer didn't kill me. And that I can be healed, and that like I can look towards a future because I'm alive right now. And that was something that twice I didn't think I would be. Um and so I started to think that, and my husband one day was like, babe, you need to write a book. And I was like, you are tripping. Like, I'm still having seizures. I still have all this cancer. I'm crying all the day. I'm depressed. I'm not depressed. My levels are high and low. And he's
mm.
like, there could be another Tiffany out there.
Yeah. Right.
And
Right.
eventually, I wrote a book, and I wrote a 7-stage devotional called Pick Up Your Crown.
Mm,
Literally, it's a 7-stage devotional to help women and girls as they are on their journey for healing. Because the reality is, for me, I didn't look for a guide. I didn't have a guide. No
mm.
one told me what to do or any of that. I had to rely on God and my friends and my husband. And literally, I wouldn't be standing here right now, well, sitting here right now, it wasn't for these 7 stages. In this book, I go through the 7 stages that I went through to be able to get past the shockness of the cancer and get
Mm.
to a more place where I'm even able to talk about social justice. Like, Dave, there was a point of all of this where I didn't even think that I was going to ever be able to teach anti-racist trainings or do organizing again, because the way my brain process is
Brutal.
abnormal now. And I just thought I was giving up. Like, I almost gave up on everything. And I'm just thankful that I didn't.
I am. I am too, Tiffany. That would be a loss. That yeah, and I just think anyone that knows you is not surprised to hear you're a fighter and that you have something to offer on the other, and not just on the other end of it, because you're still going through it in many ways.
Yeah,
That like
I literally am actually, Dave. Like, I'm still
yeah.
getting biopsies done. I'm still like having like, so another thing that happened while I've been dealing with the cancer is I got diagnosed with something called psychogenic non-epileptic seizures. And here's the thing. I remember talking to my doctors about both of these things and them being like, hey, both of these things are really rare. It's
Mm,
so abnormal to see someone with both, and especially at my age. I'm 26.
mm,
And guess what, Dave? I have them both. And so just even trying to find doctors who actually understand what's going on with me,
yeah.
it's very difficult. I'm
Yeah.
still right in the middle of this. But even in the middle of it, I just believe that God got me. And I believe that even in the middle of this, I can help a woman. I can help a girl who's at the beginning of this, because
Mm,
I needed someone to pull me through.
yeah.
And I'm thankful for the support system that I have that helped pull me through. Now I want to help some women and some girls pull them through this too, because
Yeah.
it may not be cancer, it may be like trauma that you encountered growing up. It may be like the fact that you're in an abusive relationship, or the fact that you're abusing drugs, or whatever it is. It may just be something that you're just holding on to. Like, it doesn't have to be cancer, it doesn't have to be seizures. It could just be that you feel bound and you want to break free.
Mm,
This book is literally for a group of people, a group of women and girls who say they want to be free. And
mm,
even I have had men read this book and literally are like, this book is so helpful. So
mm.
so if you are a man or a boy who are like, hey, I need a book, just don't read the part that says queen, and read this and get on your journey of healing, because there's
Yeah.
something about being free from all of the baggage. It's,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh man, that's true. Well, and also I think, well, I'm getting my signed copy. I know that much. And also that the idea is of listening to someone else's story and understanding what their journey has been of hope and loss and suffering and all of it mixed together, not in some like sequential order, how it all kind of flows together, is a beautiful and learning experience. You understand more. You can, like, for a guy to read something like that and they don't have to internalize it themselves. They can just like, oh, that helps me to understand a little bit better what it might have been like for you to go through what you're going through and understand that hope in a new way that you have,
Exactly.
you know? I think
Yep.
that's powerful. So you're not only doing systemic justice work, you're also a pastoral intern, aren't you?
Yeah, so technically, I'm one of the pastors on staff at Bethel. Actually, hey, Dave, I got my district license recently.
Oh,
Yeah,
congratulations. That's amazing.
thanks.
So wait, are you not an intern anymore? What's how does that work?
So I'm just a reverend on staff.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
Okay, that's all right. That's incredible. Congratulations.
thank you.
And so you're doing, so you're a pastor. You are doing all the systemic change. You've started like 3 organizations that I know of, and and you've now written a book. And so that's a very exciting thing. What is it that's like the key thing that's driving you right now that you're focused on? Is it the women and girls, or is it all together? Do you have no like time to separate it? What is the thing that's on your mind right now?
It's all together. I have no
Yeah.
time to separate it.
Yeah.
Honestly, I feel like there's such a sense of urgency. And let me just name, because somebody could be like, oh, a sense of urgency is a characteristic of white supremacy. It is, unless it's coming from a black or indigenous person.
Yeah. Right.
So there was such a sense of urgency around, it's that there's such a sense of urgency around all of it,
Yeah.
right? We have to continue to fight for equity. So I
Mm,
could never just sit that down.
mm,
However, fighting for equity also means being there and helping women and girls get their healing,
yeah.
because healing and mental health is radical,
Yes.
right? Especially done by Black and Indigenous women and girls. It's
Yes.
radical. So that's why I say they go hand in hand,
Yeah.
because you can't see one without the other. If
So
I
true.
didn't pay attention to my mental health, I wouldn't be able to do this work.
Yes.
And that's why we always tell people that this anti-racism work and this fight to equity is not a sprint, it is a marathon, which
Yeah.
means that you need to keep thinking about your healing, you need to keep prioritizing your mental health, and when you do, it is radical.
That's so true. We've talked about that on this podcast with my friends Coco and with Celeste, the therapist, and just that essential mental health component to all of it too. I'm curious, real quick. I wanted to ask you about that sense of urgency thing. That might be a newer concept that people haven't understood before. Um, that's a characteristic of white supremacy. Can you
Mhm.
explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so there's a list of like characteristics of white supremacy
Mm,
culture that you could literally just research, and everybody's talking about it. And
mm.
sense of urgency is one of them. And it's that feeling that of like when and this could sound really weird, but when white people are like, oh, we need to do this right now, it has to get done. But all the black people and all the indigenous people in the room are like, wait, what? That's what it
Yeah.
looks like. It's like this sense of urgency to get something done without, especially without the input of the Black and Indigenous people.
Right.
And on top of that, so the second point of that is also when it falls on their shoulders.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the times when I've seen sense of urgency, especially in the workplace, so if you're looking for the nugget for the workplace, I see it in like white like positionality. So white bosses being like, this needs to happen right away, it needs to get done. But there was no need for that sense of urgency. Like
Mm,
it could have waited another week.
yeah.
What was the big idea between pushing it? And it's like what we choose to put a sense of urgency on. Are we only putting a sense of urgency on things that center whiteness? Or are we putting a sense of urgency on things that center BIPOC people,
Right.
BIPC, so Black, Indigenous people of color, right?
Right.
Are we really putting a sense of urgency on there? Because if we are, then it should come from them.
Right. And I think it's the a way that people can that's really helpful. I think another way that I internalize that is that when someone wakes up to something that they didn't realize was there,
Hmm.
they're like, "Oh man, no, we got to go. Let's go. Let's go." And it's like that's the moment when we need to encourage people to hold on. Oh, that's amazing that you've woken up to that. Now just listen for a little while.
Yeah.
Cuz that yeah, go ahead.
And it's because, like, that's when you get into a sprint, and the
Right.
reality is when people sprint, they burn out,
That's true.
and it still leaves Black and Indigenous people holding the bag,
Yes.
and so that's why it's so important for us to recognize it's a marathon, because we don't just need performative allies. We don't just need allies for right now. We
Mm,
need accomplices with this work, and
mm,
accomplices understand that this is a marathon.
yeah. Oh,
So